Jake ran toward the massive head that held Zara in its jaws. The other Altarian soldiers were still firing their weapons, but the energy bolts just bounced off the creature's thick hide. The Void Crawler's other 3 heads turned toward Jake, sensing a new threat. Time seemed to slow down as Jake reached the monster. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Each tooth was as long as his forearm, and the creature's breath smelled like rotting meat and sulfur. Zara's armor was cracking. Under the pressure of those jaws, Jake had no energy weapons left, no advanced technology, no genetic enhancements. All he had was his brain, his body, and 8 years of experience surviving in the worst places in the galaxy. The head holding Zara was the largest of the 4. Its neck was as thick as a tree trunk, covered in scales that looked like black metal. But Jake had noticed something during the fight. When the creature turned its heads quickly, there was a moment where the scales separated slightly at the joint where the neck met the skull. That was his target. Jake jumped up and grabbed onto the creature's lower jaw with both hands. The monster's skin felt like ice and fire at the same time. The other 3 heads immediately turned toward him, their mouths opening to reveal rows of deadly teeth. But Jake was not trying to hurt the creature from the outside. He was looking for leverage. Years of salvage work had taught him about stress points and mechanical advantage. He had spent countless hours prying apart twisted metal hulks with nothing but crowbars and determination. This was just a bigger version of the same problem. The Void Crawler tried to shake him off, but Jake held on tight. He could feel Zara's armor beginning to give way in the creature's grip. He had maybe 10 seconds before she was crushed to death. Jake planted his feet against the creature's throat and pulled back on the lower jaw with every ounce of strength in his body. He felt something pop in his back, and his arms burned with the effort. But slowly, impossibly, the massive jaws began to open. The creature realized what was happening and tried to clamp down harder, but Jake had changed the angle of its bite. Instead of crushing inward, the pressure was now directed outward, against the natural movement of the jaw muscles. "Get out of there!" Jake shouted to Zara. She did not need to be told twice. The moment the jaws opened wide enough, she rolled out and fell to the cave floor. Her armor was dented and cracked, but she was alive. Now Jake had a bigger problem. He was hanging from the jaws of an angry monster, and the other 3 heads were moving in for the kill. But Jake was not done yet. He had spent his whole life being underestimated, being told he was not strong enough or smart enough. Every time, he had proved them wrong by refusing to give up. The creature's jaw joint was right in front of him now. He could see where the massive muscles attached to the bone. More importantly, he could see the weak point where thousands of years of evolution had created a perfect stress fracture waiting to happen. Jake let go with his left hand and reached for his pipe wrench. The tool was heavy and solid, designed to survive the harsh conditions of space salvage. He had used it to pry apart everything from asteroid miners to battleship hulks. The Void Crawler's other head struck at him like lightning. Jake twisted his body, using the creature's own jaw as a shield. Teeth scraped against scales as the heads got in each other's way. That was when Jake made his move. He swung the wrench with every bit of strength he had left, aiming for the precise point where the jaw connected to the skull. The tool hit the joint with a sound like a bell ringing. Nothing happened for a moment. Then Jake heard a crack like breaking glass. The creature's roar shook the entire cave. Its heads thrashed wildly as pain shot through its nervous system. Jake held on desperately as the monster tried to throw him off. But the damage was done. The joint was weakened now, and Jake could feel it starting to give way. He positioned himself more carefully and struck again. this time using the creature's own movements to add force to his blow. The second impact finished the job. The massive jaw joint cracked completely, and suddenly, Jake was not fighting against the creature's strength anymore. He was using physics and leverage against a broken system. Jake grabbed the lower jaw with both hands again and pulled. This time, instead of the slow, agonizing resistance he had felt before, the jaw moved easily. Too easily. The void crawler's largest head began to tear apart under its own weight. The creature had been designed by evolution to be a perfect killing machine, but evolution had never planned for something like this. No predator in the galaxy's history had ever tried to use mechanical advantage against a void crawler's jaw joint. With a sound like ripping metal, the head split completely in half. Black blood sprayed everywhere as Jake fell to the cave floor, still holding onto the creature's lower jaw. The psychic feedback from the traumatic injury hit the other three heads like a hammer blow. Their independent thoughts became confused and chaotic. Two heads crashed into each other as they tried to attack Jake at the same time. The third head bit empty air, completely disoriented. "Now!" Zara shouted, though her voice was weak from pain. "While it is confused!" The Altarian soldiers opened fire with everything they had. Energy bolts struck the remaining heads from multiple angles. Without the coordination they had before, the heads could not defend themselves properly. It took another 5 minutes of concentrated fire, but eventually the ancient monster fell silent. The massive body stopped moving, and the cave became quiet, except for the sound of heavy breathing. Jake sat on the cave floor, looking at the piece of the creature's jaw he still held in his hands. His whole body hurt, and he was covered in black, blood that smelled terrible, but he was alive. Kex was the first to speak. "Did that really just happen?" Dex nodded slowly. "A human just killed a void crawler with hand tools." Zara pulled herself to her feet, using the cave wall for support. Her armor was badly damaged, but her eyes were clear. She walked over to where Jake sat and looked down at him. "How?" she asked. Simply, Jake looked up at her and shrugged. "Leverage, physics, same way you crack open a stubborn cargo container." He held up the piece of jaw. "Everything has a weak point if you know where to look." The other soldiers gathered around them, staring at the massive corpse of the void crawler. In all of Altarian history, no one had ever killed one of these creatures in hand-to-hand combat. Most people considered them almost mythical, too dangerous to fight directly. "This is impossible," Dex whispered. "The void crawler is the apex predator of this entire sector. Our military considers them nearly invincible." Jake stood up slowly, his body protesting every movement. "Maybe the problem is that you have been trying to fight it like it is invincible. But everything dies if you hit it in the right place." Zara was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake like she was seeing him for the first time. Finally, she spoke. "We need to get moving. The smell of blood will attract other predators." As they gathered their gear and prepared to leave the cave, Jake noticed that the Altarian soldiers were treating him completely differently now. They did not just include him in their planning. They asked for his opinion first, and when Zara looked at him, there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, something that looked a lot like respect. The warning lights flashed red across Jake Martinez's cockpit as his freighter ship shook like a leaf in a storm. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the smell of burning metal filled the small space. His cargo ship, the Lucky Strike, was falling apart around him. "Come on, baby, just hold together a little longer." Jake whispered to his ship as he fought with the controls. The planet below looked like a green and purple nightmare. Thick jungle covered everything he could see, and strange glowing plants made the whole surface look like it was on fire. The ship's computer spoke in a calm voice that did not match the chaos around him. "Hull breach detected. Life support failing. Recommend immediate landing." "Thanks for the news flash," Jake muttered. He had been trying to land for the past 10 minutes, but the planet's gravity was stronger than his damaged engines could handle. The lucky strike was going down whether he wanted it to or not. Jake had been a salvage pilot for 8 years. He flew to dangerous places to collect scrap metal and old technology that other people left behind. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills. He had survived engine failures, space pirates, and solar storms. But this was different. This planet, Kepler 442b, was known throughout the galaxy as a death trap. The trees rushed up to meet him fast. Jake pulled back on the controls with all his strength, trying to slow the crash. The ship clipped the top of a massive tree, sending purple leaves flying everywhere. Then another tree, and another. Each impact sent Jake bouncing in his seat despite the safety straps. The lucky strike finally hit the ground with a sound like thunder. Jake's head snapped forward, then back. Everything went black. When Jake woke up, his mouth tasted like blood, and his head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. Smoke was coming from the control panel, and he could hear strange sounds from outside, clicks and growls that did not sound friendly. He checked his body for broken bones. His left arm hurt, and his ribs were sore, but nothing seemed to be broken. The ship's hull had a big crack running down one side, and he could see daylight streaming through it. At least he could breathe the air on this planet, though it tasted thick and humid. Jake activated his emergency beacon. The small device would send out a distress signal to anyone within range. On most planets, rescue would come within hours, but this was not most planets. Kepler 442b was in the middle of nowhere, and very few ships came here on purpose. He gathered his emergency supplies, a basic med kit, some food bars, water purification tablets, and a simple plasma pistol with 2 power cells. Not much to survive on a hostile world, but it was all he had. He also grabbed his toolkit and a metal pipe wrench, old habits from his salvage work. The sounds outside were getting louder. Jake could hear heavy footsteps moving around his ship. Something was sniffing at the hull breach. He held his breath and stayed very still. After what felt like hours, the sounds moved away. Jake carefully looked outside through the crack in the hull. The jungle was unlike anything he had ever seen. Trees as tall as skyscrapers reached up toward a purple sky. Vines hung down like curtains, and everything glowed with a soft light. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But Jake knew the real danger was not what he could see. It was what he could not see. The planets. Wildlife was legendary for being deadly. Creatures that could slice through metal with their claws. Things that hunted in packs and were smarter than most people gave them credit for. He was checking his beacon when he heard a new sound. Engines. Not one, but several. Jake looked up and saw 3 sleek aircraft flying overhead. They were not human ships. The design was too smooth, too perfect. These belonged to the Altarians. The Altarians were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had technology that seemed like magic to most humans. Their soldiers were enhanced, with genetic modifications that made them faster and stronger than regular people. They also thought humans were weak and primitive. The ships landed about 100 yards from Jake's crash site. He could hear voices speaking in the musical language of the Altarians. Then he heard boots marching through the jungle toward him. Jake stepped out of his damaged ship with his hands visible. 5 Altarian soldiers emerged from the jungle, their armor gleaming silver and blue. Their weapons hummed with energy, and their helmets had glowing displays that probably told them everything about him. The leader was tall, even for an Altarian, and moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. She removed her helmet, revealing the classic Altarian features: pale blue skin, large dark eyes, and silver hair. Her face showed amusement, like she was looking at a child who had gotten lost. "Well, well," she said in perfect English, though her accent made the words sound like music. "A little human, all alone on the most dangerous planet in this sector." She looked at Jake's basic gear and simple clothes. Then she looked at the wreck of his ship. Her soldiers laughed. One of them, a male with scars across his face, shook his head. "Commander Zara, we should just leave him. He will be dead within hours anyway." Zara smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "You are probably right, Kex, but let us ask him." She turned to Jake. "Human, do you know where you are?" "Kepler 442b, Jake replied. "And I know it is dangerous." "Dangerous?" Zara laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Dangerous does not begin to describe this place. The creatures here eat starships for breakfast. The plants can kill you just by touching them. The very air will poison you if you breathe too much of it." She looked Jake up and down again. "You won't last a day out here." Jake had heard this kind of talk before. People always underestimated salvage pilots. They thought because his job was not fancy, he must not be smart or tough. But Jake had survived 8 years in the most dangerous profession in the galaxy. He had learned a few things about staying alive. "Maybe," Jake said quietly. "But I am still breathing, and my beacon is working. Someone will come for me." Zara looked at her soldiers, then back at Jake. "We are going to our extraction point. It is a 3-day march through the worst jungle in the galaxy. You can come with us or you can stay here and die. Your choice." Jake looked at his ruined ship, then at the glowing jungle around them. He could already hear things moving in the darkness between the trees. Things that sounded hungry. "I would appreciate the company," he said. Zara shrugged. "Fine. But when you slow us down or get killed, do not expect us to risk our lives to save you." She put her helmet back on. "Try to keep up, little human." The acid storm hit just as Jake had predicted. The sky turned dark green, and drops of liquid that burned like fire began falling from the clouds. The Altarian soldiers quickly set up an energy shelter, a shimmering dome that kept the deadly rain away from them. Jake huddled under the protection with the others, watching the acid eat holes in the jungle around them. Trees hissed and smoked where the drops hit them. The storm lasted 3 hours, and when it was over, the jungle looked like a battlefield. "How did you know?" Zara asked as they packed up. "Their shelter. The planet has 2 suns," Jake explained. When they both set at the same time, the temperature change creates storms. The water picks up chemicals from the volcanic activity underground. Basic weather science. Dex shook his head in amazement. "We have been studying this planet for months, and we never figured that out." "You probably had better things to worry about," Jake said diplomatically. They started walking again as soon as the acid stopped falling. The jungle was different now. Many of the plants had been burned by the storm, leaving behind twisted black shapes that looked like monsters in the dim light. The air smelled like metal and burning leaves. After several hours of hard walking, they reached the entrance to the Screaming Caverns. Jake had read about this place in the survey reports, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. The opening in the ground was perfectly round and so deep that their lights could not reach the bottom. Strange sounds echoed up from the darkness below. "This is the only safe way to reach our extraction point," Zara explained. "The surface route goes through the territory of creatures that even we cannot fight." Jake looked down into the black hole. "And what is down there?" "According to our scouts, just some cave systems. We mapped most of it last month." Zara activated her armor's climbing gear. "It should take us 6 hours to get to the other side." But Jake was frowning. The sounds coming from below did not sound like empty caves. They sounded like something breathing, something very large. The descent into the caverns was terrifying. They rappelled down on energy cables, their lights cutting through the darkness like tiny knives. The walls of the cave were covered in strange symbols that hurt to look at. Jake tried not to think about what might have carved them. The bottom of the cave was worse than the top. The floor was covered in bones from dozens of different creatures. Some of the bones were huge, bigger than anything that should exist, and they were not old bones. Some still had meat on them. "Your scouts mapped this?" Jake whispered to Zara. Of course they did." But Zara sounded less certain than before. She was looking at the bones, too. They had been walking through the cave tunnels for an hour when Kex made a discovery that changed everything. He found the remains of the scout team. 3 Altarian soldiers in full armor, their bodies torn apart like they were made of paper. "These are our people," Zara said quietly. She knelt beside one of the bodies. "They were reported missing 2 weeks ago." Jake examined the claw marks on the armor. They were huge, and whatever made them had been strong enough to cut through. Altarian battle armor like it was cloth. What could do this? Before anyone could answer, they heard it. A sound that started low and grew louder. It was like screaming, but not from any throat that belonged on a normal world. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the cave walls until it filled their heads. "Void crawler," Dex whispered. His face had gone completely white. Jake had never heard of a void crawler, but from the way the Altarian soldiers were reacting, it was not good news. They raised their weapons and formed a defensive circle, but their hands were shaking. "What is a void crawler?" Jake asked. "The apex predator of this planet," Zara replied. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. 20 feet long, multiple heads, each one capable of independent thought. Its hide can deflect energy weapons, and it hunts by driving its prey insane with psychic screams. As if summoned by her words, the creature appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Jake's first thought was that someone had taken a nightmare and made it real. The void crawler was shaped like a giant snake, but it had 4 heads, each one as big as a car. Its skin was black and seemed to absorb their lights. When it moved, reality seemed to bend around it. The creature's 4 heads turned toward them, and Jake saw intelligence in those ancient eyes. This was not just a predator. This was something far worse. The psychic scream hit them like a physical blow. Jake fell to his knees as the sound drove spikes of pain through his skull. Around him, the Altarian soldiers were in even worse shape. Their enhanced nervous systems made them more sensitive to the creature's attack. Blood ran from their noses, and their weapons fell from their hands. The void crawler began moving toward them, its massive body flowing like liquid darkness. Jake forced himself to stand up. The screaming in his head was horrible, but he had grown up in the scrap yards of Earth. He had learned to work through pain. While the Altarians writhed on the ground, Jake started thinking. The creature was big and powerful, but it was also in a confined space. That meant it had to follow the tunnels, which limited how it could attack. And if it was as smart as Zara said, it would be overconfident. Ancient predators always were. Jake grabbed a handful of small rocks from the cave floor and threw them down a side tunnel. The sound echoed in the darkness. Two of the creature's heads turned to investigate the noise, while the other two stayed focused on the main group. That gave Jake an idea. If the heads could think independently, maybe they could be confused independently too. He started moving, staying low and using the cave formations for cover. The void crawler was focused on the helpless Altarians, who were still suffering from the psychic attack. Jake made his way to a section of the cave where old water had carved channels in the rock. The creature's massive body was stretched across the tunnel as it prepared to strike Zara, who was trying to crawl away despite the pain in her head. Jake had maybe 30 seconds before she became monster food. He found what he was looking for, a section of cave wall that had been weakened by thousands of years of water damage. The rock was cracked and ready to fall. Jake placed his hands against the weakest point and pushed with all his strength. Nothing happened. The void crawler reared up, preparing to crush Zara with its massive coils. Jake could see that she was trying to reach her weapon, but her hands would not obey her commands. Jake pulled out his pipe wrench and used it as a lever against the cracked rock. He threw his whole body weight against it, feeling something pop in his shoulder. Still nothing. Then he remembered something from his salvage training. Sometimes you do not need to be stronger than the thing you are fighting. You just need to be smarter. Jake aimed his plasma pistol at the crack in the wall and fired both remaining power cells at the same spot. The energy bolt superheated the rock, expanding it rapidly. The already weakened wall gave way with a sound like thunder. Tons of rock crashed down on the void crawler's middle section, pinning it in place. The creature's 4 heads thrashed wildly, but its body was trapped under the rubble. The psychic screaming stopped abruptly as the creature focused all its attention on freeing itself. The Altarian soldiers struggled to their feet, their weapons coming back up. "Now!" Jake shouted, "while it is distracted!" Energy bolts filled the tunnel as the Altarians opened fire on the creature's exposed heads. But even hurt and trapped, the void crawler was far from beaten. It twisted its long neck and snapped at Zara with jaws full of teeth like swords. Zara rolled away, but not fast enough. The creature's teeth caught her armor and lifted her off the ground. Jake could hear the metal beginning to crack under the pressure. That was when Jake did something that would be talked about in Altarian military academies for decades to come. He ran straight at the monster's head. The jungle was worse than Jake had imagined. Every step forward was a battle against thick vines that seemed to grab at his clothes. The air was so humid he felt like he was breathing soup. Strange insects buzzed around his head, and he could hear things moving in the trees above them. Zara's squad moved through the jungle like they owned it. Their advanced armor protected them from the thorny plants, and their helmet displays probably showed them exactly where to step. Jake had to work twice as hard just to keep up. "Careful of the blue flowers," Jake called out as Kex reached toward a pretty plant growing on a tree trunk. Kex stopped and looked back at him. "What?" "Those blue flowers. They spray acid when you touch them. I read about them in the planetary survey reports." Zara turned around, her helmet tilting as she studied Jake. "You studied this planet?" "I study every planet I might crash on," Jake said simply. "It is part of the job." Kex pulled his hand back from the flower. A moment later, A small bird landed on the plant. The flower immediately sprayed a stream of clear liquid, and the bird fell to the ground, its feathers smoking. Useful information, Zara admitted, but she did not sound impressed. She sounded annoyed that a human knew something her people did not. They had been walking for 2 hours when the jungle around them went quiet. No more insect buzzing, no more bird calls. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. "Something is wrong," whispered Dex, the youngest member of Zara's squad. His voice sounded nervous through his helmet speaker. Jake felt it too. The wrongness in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. He had felt this before on other dangerous worlds. It meant something big and hungry was watching them. Razorwing. "Stalkers," he whispered. Zara spun around to face him. "How do you know that?" The silence. They hunt by making everything else afraid to make noise. And there. Jake pointed up into the canopy. "See that branch moving? There is no wind." As if his words had been a signal, the attack began. 6 creatures dropped from the trees like nightmares made real. They were the size of large dogs, but built like hunting cats. Their skin was dark green with silver stripes. But the worst part was their claws. Each creature had 6 legs, and each leg ended in claws that looked like broken glass. The claws caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. The Altarian soldiers reacted fast. Their plasma rifles came up, and energy bolts filled the air. But the stalkers were faster. They moved like liquid death, jumping from tree to tree, using the thick vines to swing around the squad. One stalker landed right in front of Zara and slashed at her with its front claws. Her armor sparked but held. She fired point blank, and the creature screamed as the plasma bolt burned through its chest. It fell, but 2 more took its place. Jake dove behind a thick tree as claws scraped across the bark inches from his head. His plasma pistol was in his hand, but he only had 2 power cells. He had to make every shot count. The fight was chaos. The stalkers moved too fast for the Altarians' weapons to track properly. Their energy shields flickered under the constant attacks. Jake watched as Kex got separated from the group, pushed back by 2 stalkers working together. "Kex!" Zara shouted, but she had her own problems. 3 stalkers had her surrounded, and her rifle was overheating from rapid fire. Jake saw Kex trip over a fallen log. The scarred soldier landed hard, and his rifle flew out of his hands. 2 stalkers jumped toward him, their crystal claws ready to tear him apart. Jake did not think. He just moved. He sprinted across the small clearing, his boots slipping on the wet jungle floor. The first stalker was in mid-jump when Jake reached it. Instead of trying to shoot it, he did something no one expected. He grabbed his pipe wrench from his belt and swung it like a baseball bat. The wrench connected with the creature's head with a sound like breaking glass. The stalker crashed into a tree and did not get up. But the second one landed right next to Kex, its claws raised to strike. Jake had read about stalker anatomy in those planetary surveys. He knew their weak spot was a nerve cluster right behind their front legs. It was a small target, and you had to hit it just right. Miss! And the creature would turn you into ribbons. The stalker reared up on its back legs to strike Kex. Jake dropped to his knees and slid across the wet ground like he was sliding into home plate. His wrench came up in a perfect uppercut, hitting the nerve cluster dead center. The stalker froze like someone had turned off a switch. Then it toppled over, dead before it hit the ground. Jake rolled to his feet and helped Kex up. The Altarian soldier stared at him through his helmet visor. "How did you do that?" "I read the survey reports," Jake said again. The rest of the fight ended quickly. With two of their pack dead, the remaining stalkers retreated into the jungle canopy. The Altarian soldiers stood in the sudden quiet, their weapons still ready. Zara walked over to where Jake stood next to the dead stalkers. She knelt down and examined the one he had killed with the nerve strike. Her helmet scanner beeped and chirped as it analyzed the creature. "Perfect strike," she said quietly. "You hit the neural cluster exactly right. Most people cannot do that even with targeting computers." Jake shrugged. "Lucky shot." "No." Zara stood up and looked at him. Really looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "That was not luck. That was skill." Kex pulled off his helmet, revealing a face that was pale even for an Altarian. "He saved my life with a piece of metal pipe." The other soldiers gathered around. They looked at Jake differently now, not like a helpless human who would slow them down, more like someone who might actually be useful. "Why did you not use your plasma pistol?" asked Dex. Jake patted the weapon on his hip. "Only 2 power cells. I was saving them for when I really needed them." "So you fought those things with hand tools instead?" Zara's voice held something that might have been respect. "Sometimes the simple way is the best way," Jake said. He wiped the blue blood off his wrench and put it back on his belt. "Besides, I grew up in the scrap yards. You learn to make do with what you have." Zara was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded to her squad. "Pack up. We need to keep moving. The smell of blood will attract other predators." As they prepared to leave, Kex walked up to Jake. "Thank you," he said in his musical, Altarian accent. "I owe you my life." "No problem," Jake replied. "We all have to watch out for each other out here." As they started walking again, Jake noticed that the Altarian soldiers were not treating him like a burden anymore. They made sure he could see where they were stepping. They warned him about dangerous plants, small things, but they meant a lot. Zara fell back to walk beside him. "Those survey reports you mentioned, do they say anything else about this planet we should know?" Jake smiled. It was the first time she had asked his opinion about anything. "Actually, yes. We are going to need to find shelter soon. The acid storms hit every evening around sunset." Zara stopped walking. "Acid storms? Did I forget to mention those?" Jake asked innocently. 3 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the Altarian research vessel Star's Edge, watching a new world grow larger in the viewport. This planet was called Zerion 7, and it was supposed to be their easiest assignment yet. Just a simple survey mission to catalog plant life for potential colonization. Jake had learned not to trust the word simple when it came to alien worlds. "The atmospheric readings are perfect," said Dr. Lynn Vexitar, the mission's lead scientist. She was Zara's younger sister, and she had the same silver hair and confident manner. "Oxygen levels ideal for both our species. Gravity only slightly higher than standard. No dangerous weather patterns detected." Jake nodded while studying the planet's surface through the ship's advanced sensors. Zerion 7 looked peaceful enough. Rolling green hills, calm blue oceans, and white clouds that drifted lazily across continents. But something bothered him about the orbital scans. "The vegetation patterns look strange," Jake said, pointing to the display. Lynn looked where he was, indicating. "How so?" "See how all the forests are perfectly circular? And they are all exactly the same size, spaced out like someone planted them on purpose." Jake traced the patterns with his finger. "That does not happen naturally. Perhaps the soil conditions create natural boundaries," Lynn suggested. but she made a note on her datapad anyway. Over the past 3 months, she had learned to take Jake's observations seriously. The landing party consisted of 12 Altarians and Jake. They touched down in a meadow between two of the circular forests. The grass was soft and blue-green, and flowers that looked like tiny stars grew everywhere. The air smelled like honey and rain. "It is beautiful," breathed Cadet Nexavon, one of the younger scientists. This was her first mission outside Altarian space, and everything fascinated her. Jake was more cautious. Beautiful places were often the most dangerous. He had learned that lesson on 17 different worlds over the past 3 months. Paradise usually came with a price. They set up their base camp quickly using Altarian prefabricated shelters that assembled themselves. The scientists immediately spread out to collect samples while Jake and the security team established a perimeter. "Remember, what we practiced!" Jake called out to the team. "Work in pairs, stay inside of the camp, and if something feels wrong, do not ignore that feeling." The first day passed without incident. The scientists filled their containers with soil samples, pressed flowers between sheets of analysis paper, and recorded the songs of bird-like creatures that flew overhead. Everything seemed normal, but Jake noticed things the others missed. The way certain areas of grass were too perfectly maintained, like someone had been taking care of them. The fact that despite all the flowers, they had not seen a single insect, and most worrying of all, the complete absence of any animal droppings or bones anywhere in the meadow. That night, as the team ate dinner around their portable heating unit, Jake shared his concerns. "I think we should move the camp tomorrow," he said. "Why?" asked Dr. Vextar. "This location is perfect for our research." "It is too perfect. That is the problem." Jake looked around at the pristine meadow. "Where are the dead leaves? The fallen branches? The animal tracks? This place looks like someone cleaned it." Lieutenant Rexbar, the security team leader, frowned. "Cleaned by whom? Our scans showed no intelligent life on this planet." "Maybe. Or maybe something that does not show up on scans." Jake stood up and walked to the edge of their camp. "I want to check something." He knelt down and examined the grass at the very edge of where it met the forest. Up close, he could see what the orbital sensors had missed. The grass did not gradually change into forest undergrowth like it should. Instead, there was a clear line where the meadow ended and the trees began, as if someone had drawn a boundary. Jake pulled out a small knife and tried to dig into the soil at the boundary line. The knife hit something hard just inches below the surface, something that felt like metal. "Dr. Vextar," Jake called out. "You need to see this." The scientist hurried over with her scanning equipment. When she ran her sensors over the area Jake had been digging, her face went pale. "There is a metallic grid underneath the entire meadow," she said quietly, "extending down at least 50 feet. "What kind of grid?" Jake asked. "I am not sure. The metal is not like anything in our databases." Lynn looked up at the peaceful meadow with new eyes. "Jake, what do you think this place really is?" Before Jake could answer, Cadet Nexavon screamed. They all ran toward the sound and found her standing at the edge of one of the circular forests. She was pointing into the trees with a shaking hand. "There," she whispered. "Do you see them?" Jake looked where she was pointing and felt his blood turn cold. Hanging from the branches of the trees were hundreds of cocoons. Each one was about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. The perfect size to hold a person. "We need to leave," Jake said immediately. "Right now." But it was too late. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, and the metallic grid that Jake had discovered started to glow with a soft blue light. All around the meadow, more lights began appearing. They were not alone. Shapes began emerging from the circular forests. At first glance, they looked like tall, thin people wearing flowing robes. But as they got closer, Jake could see that the robes were actually part of their bodies, and instead of feet, they had roots that dug into the ground as they walked. Plant-animal. Hybrids, Dr. Vexitar said in amazement. I have never seen anything like them. The creatures moved in perfect coordination, surrounding the camp in minutes. They did not carry weapons, but Jake could see thorn-like protrusions along their arms that looked sharp enough to cut through armor. One of the creatures, taller than the others and with more elaborate root systems, approached the camp. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through leaves. "Welcome to our garden," it said in perfect Altarian. "We have been preparing for your arrival." Jake stepped forward, positioning himself between the creature and the scientists. "How do you know our language?" The creature tilted its head, and Jake could see what looked like flowers where its eyes should be. "We learned from the others who came before you. They taught us much before they joined our collection." Jake felt sick as he realized what the creature meant. Those cocoons in the trees were not empty. They were previous visitors to this world, probably kept alive, but trapped forever. "What do you want with us?" Lieutenant Rexibar demanded, his hand moving toward his weapon. "The same thing we want with all who visit our garden," the creature replied calmly. "You will become part of our ecosystem. Your knowledge, your experiences, your genetic material, all will help our garden grow stronger." The other plant creatures began moving closer, their thorn-covered arms extended. Jake could see that fighting was useless. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and had no idea what these creatures were capable of. But Jake had survived impossible situations before by thinking differently than everyone else expected. While the others were focused on the immediate threat, Jake was studying the glowing grid beneath their feet. "Dr. Vextar," he said quietly, "that metallic grid, could it be some kind of control system?" "Possibly. Why?" "Because gardens need maintenance," Jake said, "and if this whole meadow is artificial, there has to be a way to shut it down." The lead creature was only 20 feet away now. "Do not resist," it said in its whispering voice. "The joining process is more pleasant when you do not struggle." Jake looked at the perfect meadow, the carefully maintained boundaries, and the glowing grid beneath their feet. Then he looked at his teammates, who were preparing to fight a battle they could not win. Sometimes the best way to survive was not to fight the trap, but to break it entirely. Jake reached into his pack and pulled out the void crawler claw that he still carried everywhere. The massive, sharp piece of bone gleamed in the alien starlight. "Everyone get ready to run," he whispered to his team. Then Jake raised the claw above his head and drove it deep into the glowing grid at his feet. The journey out of the caves was very different from the way in. The Altarian soldiers moved carefully around Jake like he was something dangerous and unpredictable. Not dangerous to them, but dangerous to anything that might threaten their group. Jake tried to clean the black blood off his clothes and gear, but the smell would not go away. It was sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in the sun. Every few minutes, he caught one of the soldiers looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. They climbed out of the caves just as the twin suns were rising. The jungle above looked almost peaceful in the morning light. Birds were singing again, and the air smelled like growing things instead of death and sulfur. "How far to your extraction point?" Jake asked as they set up camp to rest. 6 hours of walking," Zara replied. She was working on her damaged armor with a repair kit. Maybe 8, depending on what we run into. Jake nodded and sat down against a tree. His whole body ached from the fight with the void crawler. His shoulder was definitely injured, and he was pretty sure he had cracked at least one rib. But he was alive, and so were the others. Kex sat down next to him. I have been thinking about what happened down there. Yeah? In all our military training, we learned that void crawlers are unbeatable in direct combat. The official strategy is to run away and call for orbital bombardment. Kex shook his head. But you did not run. Running was not really an option, Jake said. Besides, I have never been good at giving up. That is what I do not understand, Kex continued. You had no advanced weapons, no armor, no genetic enhancements. By every measure we use, you should have been the first to die. Instead, you killed something that our best warriors fear to face. Jake was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you were a kid, did you ever have to fix something that was broken? Something important? Kex looked confused. Our technology rarely breaks, and when it does, we replace it with something better. Right. But humans do not always have that option. Sometimes we have to make do with what we have. We learn to see things differently. Jake picked up a small stick and started breaking it into pieces. You see a void crawler as an invincible monster. I see a machine with moving parts. Everything with moving parts can break if you know where to push. Dex had been listening to their conversation. But how did you know where to push? Jake smiled. I grew up poor on Earth, really poor. When something broke, we could not afford to replace it. We had to figure out how to fix it with whatever we could find. You learn to see weak points in everything. So your poverty made you stronger? Zara asked. She had finished working on her armor and was now cleaning her weapons. Not stronger, different. Jake thought about how to explain it. Your people have amazing technology. You can solve most problems by building something better. But humans have to solve problems with whatever is lying around. It teaches you to think in ways that your people might not. The rest period ended, and they started walking again. The jungle was still dangerous, but somehow it felt less threatening now. Jake noticed that when they encountered hazards, the Altarian soldiers looked to him first for advice. When they found a river blocking their path, Jake showed them how to test the current and find the safest place to cross. When strange flowers started releasing spores that made them dizzy, Jake recognized the plants from his survey reports and led them around the danger zone. Each time, Zara watched him with growing interest. Tell me about these survey reports you keep mentioning, she said as they walked. Every salvage pilot gets them. Most people throw them away because they are boring. Lots of technical details about gravity, atmosphere, wildlife, geology. But I read every one. Jake ducked under a low-hanging vine. You never know when that boring information might save your life. You memorize all of it? I try to. Information is the only advantage people like me have. They reached the extraction point just as the afternoon heat was becoming unbearable. It was a clearing where someone had set up a beacon years ago. Now it was overgrown with purple moss, but the beacon still worked. Zara activated her communicator and called for pickup. Within minutes, Jake could hear the sound of approaching engines. 3 Altarian ships appeared over the treetops and landed in the clearing. As the ships powered down, Jake realized that his adventure was over. Soon he would be back in civilization, looking for another salvage job. The thought made him feel strangely sad. Jake, Zara said, walking up to him as the other soldiers loaded their gear. "Yes? I owe you an apology." Jake looked surprised. "For what?" "For what I said when we first met, about you not lasting a day out here." Zara's voice was serious. "I was wrong. Very wrong." "It is okay. People underestimate humans all the time. No, it is not okay." Zara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "I almost got my entire squad killed because I was too proud to listen to someone I thought was beneath me. You saved all our lives multiple times, and I treated you like dead weight." Jake did not know what to say to that. "I have a proposition for you," Zara continued. "The Altarian Exploration Corps is always looking for consultants, people who understand dangerous worlds and how to survive on them. The pay is excellent, and you would be working with the best equipment in the galaxy. You want me to work for you? I want you to work with us. There is a difference." Zara smiled, and this time it was a real smile, not the mocking expression she had worn when they first met. "We have the technology to go anywhere in the galaxy, but we do not always have the wisdom to survive what we find there. You do." Jake thought about it. It would mean leaving his old life behind. No more flying alone through dangerous space, scraping together a living from other people's trash. But it also meant working with people who respected what he could do. What would I be doing exactly? Teaching us how to think like you do. How to see weak points where we see only strength. How to survive with nothing but creativity and determination. Zara gestured toward the ships. "Our people are brave and skilled, but we have become dependent on our technology. When it fails, we do not know what to do. You do. And you think. I can teach that? I think you already have. Look at my soldiers." Jake looked around the clearing. Kex was using a piece of broken branch as a lever to move a heavy rock, instead of just using his armor's strength. Dex was testing the wind direction before choosing where to set up their communications equipment. Small things, but they showed a different way of thinking. "We leave for Altair Prime tomorrow," Zara said. "The formal offer will be waiting for you there. But I wanted to ask you personally first." Jake looked up at the purple sky of Kepler 442b. In a few hours, he would be off this deadly planet forever. He had survived against impossible odds, just like he always did. But this time, someone had noticed. "All right," he said finally. "I will give it a try." Zara nodded, satisfied. "Good. But I have one condition." "What is that?" She pointed to the massive claw mark that Jake had carved into the void crawler's hide as a trophy before they left the caves. He had tied it to his pack like a badge of honor. "Keep that with you. When people see it, they will know that you are the human who ripped a monster in half with his bare hands. It will remind them not to underestimate what humans can do." Jake touched the claw mark and smiled. "You think people will believe that story?" "They will when they meet you," Zara said. "After all, you did not just last a day out here. You conquered this place with nothing but your refusal to quit. That is something no amount of technology can replicate." As they boarded the ships and lifted off from the dangerous planet, Jake looked down at the jungle that had almost killed him. Somewhere down there was the body of a creature that the entire galaxy considered invincible. A creature that had met its end because one human refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The ships turned toward the stars, carrying Jake toward a new life among people who finally understood that humanity's greatest strength was not what they could build, but what they refused to let break them. And in his pack, The claw mark of the void crawler served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is simply refusing to give up. The moment Jake's void crawler claw pierced the glowing grid, everything changed. Sparks of blue electricity shot up from the ground, and a sound like screaming metal filled the air. The plant creatures stopped moving instantly, their flower eyes turning toward Jake with what looked like shock. "What have you done?" the lead creature whispered, its voice no longer calm and confident. The grid beneath their feet began flickering. Some sections went dark, while others flared brighter. Jake could feel the metal vibrating through his boots as whatever system controlled this place started to fail. "Run!" Jake shouted to his team. "Head for the ship." But the Altarian scientists were too amazed by what was happening to move immediately. All around the meadow, the perfect grass was beginning to change. In some places it turned brown and died. In other places it grew wild and tall, reaching toward the sky like it had been held back for years. The plant creatures let out a collective moan that sounded like wind through a dying forest. Their coordinated movements became chaotic as the system that controlled them began to break down. "The entire ecosystem is collapsing," Dr. Vexistar said in wonder, watching her scanner readings change rapidly. "That is the idea," Jake replied, pulling the claw free and driving it into another section of the grid. More sparks flew, and another section of the meadow began to revert to its natural state. Lieutenant Rexbar finally understood what Jake was doing. "Everyone move! Get back to the ship before this whole place falls apart!" They ran across the failing meadow as chaos erupted around them. The circular forests were changing too. Trees that had been perfectly shaped and maintained were now growing wild. Branches twisted in impossible directions, and leaves fell like rain. Behind them, the plant creatures were trying to repair the damage Jake had caused, but they moved slowly and awkwardly now that their coordination was broken. Some of them were arguing with each other in their wind-voice language. Jake's team reached their ship just as the most dramatic change occurred. The cocoons hanging in the trees began to crack open. Whatever preservation system had kept them sealed was failing along with everything else. "Should we help them?" Cadet Nexavon asked, pointing toward the trees where shapes were beginning to emerge from the breaking cocoons. "Yes, but carefully," Jake said. "We do not know what condition they are in." What they found in the cocoons was heartbreaking. Dozens of beings from different species, all alive but barely conscious. Some had been trapped for years, maybe decades. Their bodies were weak, but their minds seemed intact. Among them were 3 Altarian explorers who had vanished 2 years earlier. Dr. Vextar recognized one of them immediately, her own research partner who had been presumed dead. "Kira!" Lynn ran toward her friend, who was sitting against a tree looking confused and weak. "Lynn?" Kira's voice was barely a whisper. "Where? How long have I been here?" 2 years, Lynn said gently. "We thought you were dead." As they helped the rescued prisoners back to their ship, Jake kept watch on the plant creatures. They had retreated to the edges of their dying forests and seemed to be having some kind of heated discussion. Their perfect garden was falling apart, and they did not know how to stop it. The lead creature approached Jake one more time as they prepared to leave. Its flower eyes were dim now, and its root feet moved unsteadily across the changing ground. "You have destroyed something that took us centuries to create," it said sadly. "You were killing people," Jake replied without sympathy, "trapping them forever to feed your garden." They were not dying. They were becoming part of something greater. The creature looked around at its collapsing world. "Now everything will return to chaos," The careful balance we maintained will be lost. Jake studied the creature for a moment. Despite what it had done, he could hear genuine sadness in its voice. Maybe chaos is better than a perfect prison. You do not understand. This world was dying when we arrived. The natural ecosystem was failing. We saved it by creating order, by controlling every aspect of the environment. The creature's voice grew weaker. Without our guidance, everything will die. Maybe, Jake said, or maybe it will find a new way to live. Sometimes things need to break before they can heal properly. The plant creature did not respond. It turned and walked slowly back toward its forest, where its companions were waiting. Jake watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. The flight back to the research ship was subdued. The rescued prisoners were taken to the medical bay, where Altarian doctors worked to reverse the effects of their long imprisonment. Most would make full recoveries, though it would take time. Dr. Vexitar found Jake in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. The Planetary Council wants a full report on what happened down there. What will you tell them? The truth. That we encountered a hostile ecosystem that had been artificially maintained by plant-based life forms, and that you saved all our lives by finding a way to shut down their control system. Lynn sat down beside him. How did you know that destroying the grid would work? Jake shrugged. I did not know for sure, but I figured that anything artificial has to have a weak point. The grid was obviously important to their setup, so I decided to break it and see what happened. That was incredibly dangerous. The whole planet could have exploded or something. Maybe. But doing nothing was definitely going to get us all turned into garden decorations. Jake turned away from the stars to look at her. Sometimes you have to take big risks to solve big problems. Over the following weeks, long-range sensors showed that Zarion 7 was indeed changing rapidly. The circular forests were spreading and merging. New growth appeared in areas that had been barren. The planet's ecosystem was finding its own balance without the artificial controls. Some of the plant creatures survived the transition and learned to live in the new, wilder environment. Others did not adapt and disappeared. But the planet itself became more alive and diverse than it had been in centuries. The rescue mission made Jake famous throughout Altarian space. News networks called him the Garden Breaker and the human who freed a world. Scientists from dozens of species wanted to study his methods, but Jake remained focused on his real job, teaching others how to survive in places where technology was not enough. 6 months after the Zarion 7 incident, Jake stood in a classroom at the Altarian Military Academy, addressing a group of young officers who would soon be exploring unknown worlds. The most important thing to remember, he told them, is that every system has flaws. Every trap has an escape route. Every problem has a solution, even if it is not obvious at first. He held up his Void Crawler claw, which had become his trademark teaching tool. This claw did not make me strong enough to kill a monster, but it gave me the leverage to use the monster's own strength against it. A young Altarian cadet raised her hand. But how do you find these weak points, sir? Jake smiled. By looking at things differently than everyone else expects, by asking questions that no one else thinks to ask, and by remembering that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. He walked over to a display showing images of Zarion 7 before and after their mission. The plant creatures thought their perfect system was unbeatable, but perfection is actually a weakness. When everything depends on one control system, all you have to do is break that system. Another cadet spoke up. What if you are wrong? What if breaking the system makes things worse? Then you adapt and try something else, Jake replied. The key is not being afraid to fail. Every failure teaches you something new about the problem you are trying to solve. As the class ended and the young officers filed out, Jake remained at the front of the room, thinking about all the worlds he had seen and all the impossible problems he had helped solve. Humans were still the newcomers in the galaxy. They still had the weakest technology and the shortest lifespans. But they had something that older, more advanced species sometimes forgot: the willingness to try new approaches when the old ones did not work. Jake touched the void crawler claw hanging from his belt and smiled. Tomorrow there would be another world. Another challenge, another chance to prove that sometimes the best way forward was to break something that everyone else thought was unbreakable.